to be aware of is the light source. So SketchUp has a light source. It's a sunlight, and you can access it or the controls for it by going into your window menu option and going to where it says shadows. So turn on your shadows dialog. Again, if you're on a Windows computer and you go under window, some of these options that I'm going to show you here in this menu here are going to be under the default tray option. That will be a flyout that you have to access if it's not already open on the right-hand side. So under the shadow settings here, another thing we'll do a lot is in these dialog boxes, often in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little black plus. It may be a black minus. Clicking on it will either show more or less. So when it's a plus, it means there's more that you can show. I always like to click the plus just to see what all that I have available here. So in the shadow settings, that gives me more things to look at. And this little box here is actually the on-off switch. Go ahead and click on it. And now you've turned shadows on. So you can get a sense that the sun is shining, in my case, from somewhere off to the left here and kind of shining across the model. So you go ahead and turn those shadow settings on for yourself and see where your shadows are showing up. And now when you're orbiting around, rather than the shading changing of certain walls, now you've sort of forced on the shadows so that you can get kind of one consistent lighting here. So the light source matters. We'll see why and how it matters throughout the rendering process. But in SketchUp, you can change the time of day and the time of year, and that will change, obviously, not only where the light or the sunlight is coming from and where the shadows are being cast, but it's also, of course, going to then change the color that you're seeing of different pixels in your model or different surfaces in your model. Down here in the light dark area, you can darken the light areas. So basically think about where is the sunlight hitting, how bright, if you slide it to the right, or how dark those areas are. And then similarly where the shadows are, if you slide that slider, how dark are the shadowed or shaded areas, or how light are they, including all the way, completely not visible. So kind of the contrast between those two things. So you can change the position of the sun, which will change, obviously, how your model is rendered in SketchUp. And these changes are things that you can actually carry forward in the rendering process. Now, there's a few other things about the position of your sunlight that are related to the shadow settings. So if you go into your window menu option and you go to Model Info, go ahead and open up the Model Info window, you'll notice that on the left-hand side, there's an option for geolocation. Go ahead and pick that. And there are two ways that you can tell your SketchUp model where it's located in the world. We're not going to worry about the Add Location button now. We'll talk about that in another lesson. But the Add Location button is where you can actually use an integration with Google Maps to tell your model where it's at. But instead, we're going to just talk about the more straightforward Set Manual Location. So click on that button. And here what you're doing is you're saying where your model is located in the world so it knows where the sun should be coming from. Now, in this case, because I started a new file, it's going to default to Boulder, Colorado. That's where the SketchUp team is located. And so every model by default starts there unless you specify otherwise. So you can enter your own latitude and your own longitude in and then change the position of your model. So let's talk about how we change this. I'm going to flip over to my web browser. I'm using Chrome. And if you go, whatever web browser you're using, if you go to www.latlong.net, and there are other places like this online. I like this one, but you can find your own. You can type in a place. So I'm currently in San Francisco, so I'll type San Francisco, California, and click Find. And it will give me the latitude and longitude. And of course, I could be quite particular about exactly where I am, but this is just putting me someplace in the middle of the city. That'll be fine for now. And just copy. So highlight, and if you know your keyboard shortcuts for copy, you can do that, or you can go to your edit menu and select copy, and then go back over to SketchUp And in that same area there, just go ahead and highlight the whole thing, including whether it has a north, a south, an east, or a west at the end, and just paste right over the top of it. And then come back over to your web browser and grab the longitude, copy it. I'm using my keyboard shortcut this time. And then flip back over to Sketchup and highlight there and paste it. And now with both of those in place, if I click back and forth, it added the north and the west based off of having minuses or not. Notice though that the location didn't update. So I wasn't able to just type San Francisco here. So this is not smart. You don't just type a name in here and SketchUp goes off into the internet and looks it up for you. Instead, think of country and location as your labels, things that you just type there. So I would want to type for myself just so that later on I knew where I was in the world. I could just type San Francisco, for example. And then when I'm all done with everything, I can click OK. And now there was a slight adjustment in the shadows. So the shadows are just a little bit different in San Francisco at this particular time and date than they are in Boulder. And now when I look at my geographic location, this location here, I typed in just to help me, but it was the latitude and longitude that were the magic. So I'll go ahead and close this down. And now I know that I have my model positioned where it needs to be in the world, and I have the time and date set in a way that the sun is now telling me how it's going to be interacting with this model. So that's the second component, is where is the light source.